Today we have on Marc Nathan. Marc Nathan has been involved in the startup community since I want to say 1999. You've been a board member and mentor to various programs and institutions over the years, an active mentor to Techstars and Capital Factory in Austin. You run a newsletter called Texas Squared Startup Newsletter. You co-produce the Consumer VC Summit. You host Open Coffee and Wake Up CPG, Turn Up CPG that I'm a regular attendee of. On the side, you're the Senior Director of Market Development at Michael Best and Frederick Law Firm. So welcome to the show, Marc.
Thank you very much for having me.
What first made you venture into this space of entrepreneurship, startup, starting your own firm, or being just affiliated to this community?
I fell into it by accident, like most people. I had always been somewhat entrepreneurial in my mindset and just in the way I looked at the world. I was very enamored with business people and people have been very successful in their own professional lives. So I was always sort of focused on it, but I never really spent a lot of time in it. When the dot-com boom was happening, when the things were popping around Austin, I was still in school, but I could smell the blood in the water. I mean, there was a lot of activity going on, a lot of action, and I wanted to be a part of it. So I spent a lot of time reading magazines, the new thing called blogs that were out there that I was starting to take a look at. I was one of the first people on Twitter in Houston. I've had a couple of dry runs, a few stutter steps in starting a couple of companies. I never really panned out and never really pursued it because I've always been on the service-based side, and it just felt like a more natural fit for being in my personality type. If I'm running a company, I'm not super connected unless that's the part of the company that matters to me.
Welcome to Funds and Founders. This weekly show is tailored for Austin founders navigating the early stages of their entrepreneurial journey. I'm your host and fellow Austinite, Abhinav Sinha. If you're looking for the motivation and the insight needed to build a successful company, you're in the right place. Today we have on Marc Nathan. Marc Nathan has been involved in the startup community since I want to say 1999, when you founded an angel VC firm back in Houston. You've been a board member and mentor to various programs and institutions over the years, an active mentor to Techstars and Capital Factory in Austin. You run a newsletter called Texas Squared Startup Newsletter that rounds up everything happening in Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, Houston area for anyone subscribed. You co-produce the Consumer VC Summit. As far as I'm aware, that's twice a year. You host Open Coffee and Wake Up CPG, Turn Up CPG that I'm a regular attendee of. That's twice a month. On the side, you're the Senior Director of Market Development at Michael Best and Frederick Law Firm. And if you ask anyone in Austin, they would refer to him as Austin Super Connector. So welcome to the show, Marc.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Why don't you give everyone a quick intro of...
I can't top the intro you gave me, so I really appreciate it. That's very well researched.
Why don't we start with what first brought you to Austin?
I moved to Austin about 10 years ago. I've been coming to Austin for many years. I went to school here at University of Texas and kept coming back from Houston. I think it's important I say that. I went to school at UT, started my first company, as you mentioned earlier, while I was still a senior with my father. He was in Houston. I moved back to Houston for many years. My wife had a great job offer in 2013 to move to Baltimore. So we moved the entire family to Baltimore, Maryland. We didn't make it even a full year because it was not for us. And we came back. We said, listen, we've done Houston. We've said our goodbyes. It's probably time to explore something else. And we thought about Dallas for about 15 seconds and said, that's not for us. And Austin it was. I already had some very established friends here through both Capital Factory, which I was one of the first mentors at, and I think it's very important to mention that South by Southwest itself was a big draw for me.
Yeah.
So it was sort of a no-brainer for us to come to Austin, and we've been here ever since.
So what I like to cover is just the journey and people in the space building, and sort of the aspect of being an entrepreneur is a lifelong journey and it's not a quick win. What first made you venture into this space of entrepreneurship, startup, starting your own firm, or being just affiliated to this community?
I fell into it by accident, like most people. I had always been somewhat entrepreneurial in my mindset and just the way I looked at the world. I was very enamored with business people and people have been very successful in their own professional lives. So I was always sort of focused on it, but I never really spent a lot of time in it. When the dot-com boom was happening, when the things were popping around Austin, I was still in school, but I could smell the blood in the water. I mean, there was a lot of activity going on, a lot of action, and I wanted to be a part of it. So I spent a lot of time reading magazines. There was this new thing called blogs that were out there that I was starting to take a look at. I was one of the first people on Twitter in Houston and really got to know a lot of people in the technology and social media space there. And ultimately, it was a calling. There's no other way to say it. I've always been drawn to that sort of activity. And while I don't personally consider myself a startup founder, because a service-based business is not a product-based business, and there's a huge gulf between those two, I still feel myself as an entrepreneurial person. And it was sort of a draw that I would hang out with the circus that's startups.
Have you ever thought about starting a product-based business, or have you always been on the side of service, VC, funding?
Everybody's thought about starting a company. I mean, anybody that's even touching close to or near the startup world has thought about, hey, I could do that, or I have an idea, or I can start something, or how come this doesn't exist? Yes, I have thought about it many times. I've had a couple of dry runs, a few stutter steps in starting a couple of companies. Never really panned out and never really pursued it because I've always been on the service-based side.
Makes sense.
And it just felt like a more natural fit for being in my personality type. A super connector, as you mentioned earlier, if I'm running a company, I'm not super connecting unless that's the part of the company that matters to me. And therefore, being in a product almost felt like I wasn't living up to my potential.
Makes sense. So having started out in the late 90s, early 2000s, what's sort of a big change you've seen since being in the space early on Twitter? You mentioned knowing a lot of early internet guys' blogs. Being in this space, still being in this space affiliated to this community, what are some big transitions you've seen over the time?
The biggest transition I've seen in my time doing this kind of work is just the mainstream acceptance of it. Startups and entrepreneurs were not really that well liked or well thought of for a long, long time. It was always better to be with a giant company and work for 50 years and get a gold watch in your pension when you're done. So there's still a stigma at the time of being an entrepreneur. I'm not exactly sure when it happened, but I am sure that it did happen. There's been a very large cultural shift that entrepreneurs are the ones that are now celebrated. Who's the most famous person on the planet right now? It all happens to be the richest. It's Elon Musk. Who was revered like a god for design work? It was Steve Jobs. Who was now the number one philanthropist in the world after making billions of dollars? Bill Gates. I mean, there are people, and right here at home and here in Austin, look at Dell. Michael Dell has done extraordinarily well for himself, for hundreds and thousands really of people. Yeah. And he's become a philanthropist because of that. So ultimately, I find the path to be very, very interesting. And the draw is just, it's electric. I mean, the energy of being around people that are finding new ways to think about the world and have new visions of how the future should be, there's nothing more exciting than being around people like that.
Yeah. Have you seen a distinct trait amongst entrepreneurs over the past 23, 24 years from when you started in the space to now? Has it been either some commonality or some big difference in the folks you've been interfacing with?
I think there's been a generational shift in that there's just more information out there that makes it easier for people to get up to speed. For a very long time, there were no books about venture capital. There were no books about how to start a startup in a modern era. There was nothing like that. And only until we started seeing books come out, more blogs, more content, more VCs being more public with what they're thinking about, what they're doing. We have an entire press corps from TechCrunch to Read Write Web to all the major publications that deal with technology startup activity. And it's become a category that people discuss now. It used to not be. It used to be railroads and oil and transportation and construction. Now there's an entire new category of startups because people are talking about them. Let's face it, it generates the most amount of wealth and jobs in the United States right now.
That's true. So you start out in this journey, started an angel fund, a VC firm. What's one or two key things you learned being part of that institution?
That's an easy question, Avi. The number one, very first number one rule, first rule is you take home what brought you to the dance, which basically means whoever helped bring you to a place, you bring them along as you grow and go further. I've seen that happen many, many times. It certainly happened in my life. And that was one of the key factors of us starting the company with my dad and I. We had a couple of rules. Take home what brought you to the dance. And the other rule was to bet the jockey, not the horse. And we've heard that a million times. It's a cliche. It's a cliche because it's true. It's very, very clear through a lot of empirical evidence that a great team will pull a mediocre product into success, but a great product cannot be pushed to success through a mediocre team.
Yeah.
So, and another way to say that is A players hire A players, B players hire C players, and C players don't hire anybody. So I'm always a believer in the people first. The product, the market, the conditions, the money, all that is secondary to the fact that if you can find somebody with the drive, the grit, and the ambition to make something happen that didn't happen before, that's what you spend your time and money on.
I 100% agree with there has to be some sort of drive in the person you hire. And if incentives, not even incentives, if mission doesn't align, incentives come second. You can help drive mission better with the right incentive structure, but if it just doesn't exist, like if the person is just there for a 9-to-5 paycheck. I was telling someone this in SF the other day where sometimes I feel the vibe in Austin is if there's a bug at 2 p.m. on Friday, it becomes a Monday problem because it's just that kind of like vibe. But like sometimes in SF, it's like, oh no, I gotta solve this today, and then I also gotta like fix this other thing. It all has to happen before 5 p.m. But sometimes you just don't feel that urgency. And I don't know if that's like a city thing, a vibe thing, but that's why I see differences in like the startup ecosystem between the two cities. But no, I 100% agree that if you hire the right team, it also helps everyone grow together with a different sense of accomplishment, urgency, and everything else.
I want to dive into what you just mentioned about the vibe being different. The vibe is different. You're right. That observation is, in my mind, very correct. People here in Austin come here not for the ambitious way to start a startup. They come here for the balance of lifestyle and startup activity. So I've always said, and I've said this for many years, Austin is a mañana town.
Yeah.
We'll get to it mañana. You know, it's nothing is that urgent that I can't break off to go have beers on the lake.
100%.
And that's a huge draw for Austin. It's changing a little bit. There is a little bit more urgency. Austin's always had the knock of not being anywhere near as ambitious as either coast.
100%.
And that might be true. But the truth is that a win for Austin, if you build a company and sell it for $30 million in 5 years and you have majority ownership, that's a really good payday for you.
100%.
It's a lifestyle. A $30 million exit in San Francisco is a joke. It's a token you give to the homeless guy on the way in.
Yeah.
It's a shame. That's not the way it is here.
Yeah.
We are not swinging for the fences on every single try. We are swinging for lifestyle businesses that can sustain themselves. That's why we're so strong in bootstrapping here in Austin as well.
Yeah. 100%. I have one contrarian take to that, which is the sense I get when you go to a New York and SF ecosystem, you get founders and you get, because of the lack of balance, you get founders who've exited, you get a bigger mentor ecosystem, you get people who've done it before who are out and about helping others do it again. Let me go out and see what people are doing. And then you end up joining hands with people who are like, oh, I really like this idea. Let me, join you, become a co-founder, and we can grow this again. And then it, nurtures that ecosystem. Versus I feel like the trade-off in Austin is everyone who's done it is, having that beer, going to the lake or whatever. And so they're not out there with the younger founders, and the younger founders don't have sort of that mentorship to look up for, or not as much of it. I could be very wrong about this. It's just a sense or a vibe I have that when you go to SF in New York, you get these ecosystems that grow a lot faster because of that.
The density.
The density.
Sure.
And I feel like that misses here, but maybe it's a trade-off of you get the balance. So
you're correct, but it wasn't always this way. I have to say that COVID really put a damper on a lot of that activity you're discussing.
Yeah.
There were a few years from, let's say, 2012 to 2016 or so, where a place that anybody who's on this podcast has heard about called Capital Factory really was the center of entrepreneurial attention. There was one room, the kitchen, on the 16th floor of the Omni Hotel building where Capital Factory is encamped, and that was the absolute beating heart of Austin entrepreneurship. Every single VC, every single founder, every single executive, every single government official who had anything to do with startups was in that room at some point, and the buzz was palpable. You could feel it. There was an energy that was crackling. Every time I walked in there, I knew 10 people. We all had different conversations. There was a lot of catch up. So in a lot of ways, that density has spread so far out. Most people are working from home on Zoom.
100%.
They're not physically there bumping into people. I really do believe very strongly in the hallway conversation.
100%.
Hallway conversations don't happen on Zoom. They can't. It's not possible.
100%.
So a lot of that community you're discussing was there, but it's really dissipated. And I think it's coming back a little bit. I also think we're at the bottom of a cycle. You know, the people that were doing stuff back in 2008, 2009, after the crash, after the recession, came in guns blazing with a bunch of really interesting Web 2.0 style businesses that turn into real corporations. And that's why we're seeing that end of the cycle right now with things like Figma being bought and, you know, all the major tools that were sort of the modern versions of what we were using in Microsoft back in the 90s. We had a revamp of all that for cloud-based tools in the mid-2010s. Yeah. And here we are doing the same thing. There was a big blip with NFTs and crypto. Yeah. That's largely gone away, but everything is off the table and we're totally cleared right now for anything having to do with AI. So AI, I believe, is the tip of a super cycle where everything you're going to see, everything you're going to touch is going to have AI on it.
100%.
And the difference is that blockchain didn't mean anything to anybody. It was just a shared spreadsheet and it had no visceral value. AI has the ability, and we're very, very early stages. Nobody knows exactly how it's going to go, but I think we all see the writing on the wall. AI is going to touch everything, and Austin happens to be particularly well suited to deal with AI problems. So I think that while you're right, the density is a problem. I think it's going to start coalescing as more people do more things in the same direction.
100%. I agree with that. Quickly touching on why you think you're saying Austin is ripe for AI innovation. Are you saying from a founder point of view, from a VC point of view, from a regulation point of view, or from which perspective do you think
all
Austin?
All of the above. For all the reasons that Austin is thriving as a tech town, we're thriving as an AI town as well. We've got very, very deep pool of very talented engineers coming out of major university, University of Texas. And I will not deny the fact that St. Edwards and Texas State, and in a lot of ways, A&M and College Station are bringing a lot of really talented undergrads and graduate students here to Austin. That's number one. Number two, we have the infrastructure from a business perspective. We have all the support companies, all the agencies, all the web designers, developers, all the QA testers, all those people have established organizations already here. It's not like you can just start a tech community. You've got to build up. It's obvious that we have the money. The last I checked, we had 130 separate VCs that either have headquarters or main offices here in the Austin area. And those VCs, and by the way, that's up from about 30 a few years ago. Okay. It has really exploded. A lot of people have moved here because of COVID or maybe because they see opportunity here, but they're here and they're not leaving. And the money is here, so that's another major step. So we've got a young, talented pool of candidates to do engineering and design work. We've got money. And then here's the twist. This is the one thing that a lot of people don't really think about. Because of all these major office moves, because of all the flight from California, because of all the activities that are happening in Austin, we have something we've never had before. We have actual end customers here. We actually can sell things not from Austin, but to Austin.
Makes sense.
And I think a lot of people overlook the fact that we actually have people that we rub shoulders with, that we take our kids to school with, that we see at the country club, that we see at the concerts. These are the people that are buying software. And that wasn't the case before because all those buyers were in New York and California. So I think that's a little bit of a change of the cycle nobody's really talking about.
Moving on from, you ran the VC firm, angel firm, did a couple stints across various companies across Houston here and there. What pushed you to start mentoring startups and founders or entrepreneurs?
By rights, I have no ability to be a mentor. I didn't earn it. I didn't have some giant exit that makes me a genius. I'm not super wealthy. I don't really have the right to quote unquote be a mentor, but I am. I have an intrinsic need to help people, and more importantly, to help people not step in potholes that other people have stepped in. So it was really more of a force of personality situation than any kind of qualification. I deeply enjoy it. I get what I call psychological profit out of doing it, which means that I actually get a benefit by watching somebody's eyes spark when I can tell them about a story that happened a few years ago to a similar company, or I can introduce them to somebody that might be able to help them, or I can walk them through how a customer journey might go because they're not thinking about it because they're engineers. I get a tremendous amount of pride from seeing that. And on the flip side, and this is certainly dovetail with that, looking back on my career, and it's not a long career, but I've been around for a while, the highlights have really been when I can actually help somebody get a job. It's happened 4 or 5 times that I can remember that really mattered. And those jobs have turned into careers, and that makes me very, very happy to see. So I became a mentor very selfishly because I enjoy it. But I think that I've done enough homework, enough training, enough talking to other mentors, enough working with other mentor programs to know what a good mentor is and a bad mentor is. And I try to be a good one.
Okay. So on that tangent, someone looking for a mentor, how do they go about this? So outside of like leveraging a Techstar as a capital factor, outside of using a mentor network, because there's a lot of those, paid, free, all the likes, right? How do you decide whether someone I'm talking to is going to be a good mentor or not? Where does that stem from?
It's strictly personality. And the only thing I could tell people about being a mentor, it's really about pattern recognition.
Okay.
I mean, my job as a mentor in my mind is to listen to somebody's story, understand where their background is, understand what they think they want, what they want to do, and where they want to go, and what their vision is. And then I pattern recognize what they're trying to do with other things that have worked in the past and display that to them. Now, the trick to being a good mentee, and any startup mentor will tell you this, there's one key factor. It's called coachability. Coachability is not necessarily listening blindly to everything their mentor says. It's being able to listen to what a mentor says and synthesize it based on conditions that you're seeing in the field and what your own needs are. But coachability is the ability to listen, to understand, and then to make a decision based on that choice, but not necessarily because of that choice. The hardest thing that most mentors deal with is a very arrogant engineering type who thinks they know everything and the world should bend 100%. To them. Those are the toughest nuts to crack. I personally, and I think this is something that I like to say out loud, I've specialized and worked with female entrepreneurs for many years. It's a big deal for me. Women who become entrepreneurs on purpose. It's not a family business. They've done it themselves. They realize they have to jump off the ledge themselves and make a company happen. I find them to be the most coachable because they have so many things going on. They have to prioritize, and they're very, very good at sifting out what's right and what's not right. So working with female entrepreneurs in general is a lot easier from a coachability standpoint.
How should someone think about vetting a mentor? So are there tips or tricks you have? Are there questions someone should ask? Are there things someone can do to prep for establishing that relationship? And if yes, like, are there certain red flags that pop up in a mentor-mentee journey where a mentee can say, hey, maybe this isn't working out right?
It's a great question, but first we have to make some definitions happen. I have a theory, and nobody's corroborated this, it's just me. I think there's a massive difference between how we label mentors and advisors. We jumble them up, just the same way we jumble up accelerators and incubators.
100%.
They are not the same, and their motivations are the same.
100%.
Are not entirely the same. In my mind, and this is my definition, a mentor helps the person. So it is a personal relationship, whereas an advisor helps a company.
100%.
And a lot of people sort of overlook those things. Both Y Combinator and Techstar started calling everybody mentors when they really should have been called advisors. But we're stuck with it now. That's the way it is, and that's the definition. So ultimately, I think that for somebody vetting a mentor, they have to have, number one, are their values aligned? Number two, do they have time for me? Number three, are they going to be as helpful to me as I can be to them? Because it really is a two-way street. It's not a top-down thing, although most people think it is. But red flags for a mentor, somebody who says, I want to be your mentor, and then has their hand out for a consulting agreement. So that happens a lot. There's no real training for that. You also have to watch out a little bit for conflicts of interest. They are going to do what's best for you as long as it doesn't get in the way of what's best for them.
100%.
So a mentor who deals with lots and lots of companies can sometimes get them jumbled up and might not actually have your best interest in mind. So you've got to be careful of that. And ultimately, are they going to look good on your cap table or not? Do you want to put this person on your advisory page or not? If they're not going to be helpful, then it might not be in your best interest as a company or as a person to really help, like, push them and give them the credibility of being a mentor when they don't really deserve it. But those are minor red flags. Most people want to help you, especially in Austin. Austin's number one pastime, our side hustle is helping each other.
Yeah.
You've heard me say that many times. I still think it's true. It really does matter, though, what a mentor sees for you as a career, not necessarily for this company. Companies come and go. Careers need to be nurtured.
100%.
And so red flag, I think that a mentor situation turning into a consulting or employee situation is probably the biggest one for me. Everything else is all personality based.
Switching gears a little bit, for someone who's looking to mentor folks, whether a startup entrepreneur, what's one piece of advice you have for them? How can they best start their mentor journey, and what's something they can do to prep for it? The reason I ask is a couple of folks I was working with in India reached out and they asked me random questions, and sometimes I'm inclined to tell them, hey, is this the right question to ask? Maybe you should think about it this way, but I'm not always sure if I'm imposing my line of thinking on them, or should I help guide their line of thinking in a better, like there's always these like random discussions I'm having in my head of
that question, that idea, should I be helping or pushing? That is the heart of being a mentor. That is the one question. If you're asking that question, you're probably going to be a good mentor, because people who are bad mentors, and they do exist, just want to tell people how they did it and how they should be. They want clones of themselves when they were younger. That's not the way I think you should be a mentor, but I have seen that kind of behavior. Just asking the questions is really how to start. It becomes very, very, very apparent if somebody's going to listen to you or not, and whether you're wasting your time or not. But if you give somebody a gentle suggestion, most people are looking for criticism and critical feedback, whether it's positive or negative. The trick is not making the nasty part sound mean. It's not doing them any service to tell somebody that they're looking great if they don't. So I try not to sugarcoat anything. And that's a hard thing for mentors to do. But in order to get started, you just have to start listening and insert yourself where you feel like it might be helpful. And if it's not helpful, then keep your mouth shut. It's hard to do. I'm a big mouth and a know-it-all. So it's really hard for me not to jump in on things. So it's a skill that you have to learn. It's a muscle you have to work out.
For example, someone literally messaged me last night saying, hey, I'm planning my 2024. What are 5 professional things I should put on my vision board? I'm like, I don't know if I can just define those for you. Like, I need to know what your goals are, your company goals, your startup goals, and we can maybe help structure those. I can't just tell you 5 things to work on. Like, there has to be a little more structure to this. But I understand where they're coming from. But again, there's always this trade-off of how much do you define versus how much do you push them to find the answer. So,
great mentors ask great questions. Your job is not to give them the answer. Your job is to help them find the answer. And the way I look at it, and I've looked at this for a long time, I'm basically a trailblazer. I'm bushwhacking in the jungle in front of an entrepreneur so they don't land in his trap.
No, we're good. Yeah.
So I feel very strongly that your job is to be a guide. You're guiding them on their journey. It's their trip. It's their job. It's their business, their startup. You can only be as close to them as they want you to be, and you can only be as helpful to them as they allow you to be.
Makes sense. Going back to your journey, VC, you started mentoring with a bunch of folks. Mm-hmm. At what point do you start getting involved with the CPG community, and how does that happen?
That's a great question. So I've been actively involved with the CPG community for about 6 years now. CPG, for those that don't know, is consumer packaged goods. I like to tell people, close your eyes, walk into a Target. Anything you could buy at a Target is usually considered a CPG. Most people think of it as food and beverage. It's also accessories, consumer electronics, anything you could buy at the store, essentially. I got involved because in 2005, my father and I had an investment in a chocolate company up in Vancouver, Canada. And so I flew up to Vancouver, and I walked in the store, and I got the whiff of chocolate as I got out of the cab, and I said, this is pretty cool. And I walked upstairs to the president's office, and I asked, how do you keep all the workers from not eating all the chocolate, Lucy and Ethel style? And he laughed. He said, well, that's the trick we learned. What you do is you tell anybody who gets hired on the chocolate floor, they can eat as much chocolate as they want. They can stuff as much in their face as they care to do. And by the 3rd day, they're so sick of it, they never eat another piece of chocolate. And I always thought that was a very insightful way of thinking about things. Give somebody what they want to the point where they don't want it anymore.
Yeah.
But what I learned in that business, and I was running around going to all the conventions and all the fancy food shows and all the expos and all the big shops, but I didn't have any training in CPG at all. So I was just learning about the chocolate business. We ultimately sold that business. Thank goodness. It was a bit of a mess, but I didn't really think about it that much for a few years until I was working for the law firm that hired me here in Austin, Egan Nelson. And I was talking to one of the lawyers who's become a dear friend and a great guy, a gentleman by the name of Matt Baer, who I still keep in touch with. He's just a terrific lawyer. And we were just talking in the hallway one day, once again, talking about hallway conversations. He very casually mentioned he was having some trouble with a client issue. And he mentioned the name. And I said, well, wait a minute, I know that name. And it turns out that name was the person that is now he's a very successful guy. I'll go ahead and name drop him. It's Clayton Christopher. Clayton Christopher is considered to be one of the most successful CPG founders in all of Austin. He started with a company called Sweet Leaf Tea, where I had met him while I was a member of the Houston Angel Network. We were the first $750,000 of outside money in his firm back in 2004, I think. That investment, which I was not a part of, even though I led the due diligence, ended up being a $225 million exit from the number I heard to Nestle. So Clayton went on to do Deep Eddy Vodka and a bunch of others, from Austin East Ciders to a bunch of very well-known local brands, feed everybody. But one of the things he also did was he became a partner in a very well-known CPG venture firm called Kavu Ventures here in Austin and New York and California. And when Matt, my friend and Lawton colleague, mentioned that we were representing him, my jaw dropped. I said, well, I didn't know that. What do you mean we're representing? He said, no, he's a personal client. He's been a friend of mine for years. And I looked him in the eye. I said, well, you're telling me that we have under our umbrella one of the largest CPG investors in the world, maybe? And he said, well, yeah, we do. And I said, well, how come we don't have more CPG clients? And he kind of cocked his head and looked at me and said, well, I don't know. And I said, well, do you mind if I explore this? And he said, look, if they have money to spend on legal bills, we're happy to talk to them. And that's Matt. He's a very down-home guy, and I really like him. So I said, okay, thank you for that. And I thought about it for about a minute. I called up a friend of mine, a guy named Felipe Vega here in town, who runs an accounting firm for CPG firms. I said, Felipe, I don't know anybody in CPG. Can you maybe help me figure this out? Maybe we'll throw a happy hour or something together. And he said, sure, why not? And in about 4 weeks, we put together a really giant happy hour. As a matter of fact, from where we're sitting right now, the Blue Northern office is about 100 yards from where we're sitting right now. We had a blowout party. We had a party of CPG people who I didn't know. We had a bunch of my friends that are in the executive professional space. But what was really curious is that I had a lot of my VC friends from the tech world that were there. Now, maybe they were there for the free beer. I doubt it. They can afford it. But I was very surprised to learn that every one of the major VCs in Austin actually had at least one consumer packaged goods investment.
Got it.
Or adjacent investment. So I said, hey, wait, we're onto something here. And so ultimately that happy hour was great. I love happy hours. Yeah. Happy hours are fun. We all have a good time, except for me, they're way too loud. And since I don't drink because I don't want to forget anything, they're not that fun. So I did what I had been doing for several years back in Houston and then again in Austin, was start a morning meetup and named it Wake Up CPG. Yeah. It started in April of 2017. And here we are today doing it 6 years later, very strong, and actually expand to other cities like Houston and LA.
Yeah.
So I got into it because I was curious about the market and I thought it was underserved, but I stayed in it and I became very much I hope a part of it because I really like the people. CPG people are just the nicest, smartest, most fun, enjoyable people you'll meet. I like to say that tech people they want to be the smartest guy in the room. They just do, let's face it. CPG people in general just want to put a smile on your face.
100%.
Very different vibe. And the best part about CPG is that they can have venture style returns. It's a different path and it's a different animal, but there's a lot of money in CPG and actually quite a bit of money here in Austin for it.
100%. Every time I'm at one of your meetups, I'll talk to folks building brands. Now, I have a very problem-solving approach to this stuff. So every time they're like, I do this and then I do this, I'm like, well, why isn't there an app for that? Because they're like manually trying to find like a co-packer for like their meat product. But it has to be a very particular kind of co-packer. So it's like someone in North Carolina or whatever. But this is one guy mentioned he would go to Walmart, look at the back of every packaging, look at the FDA number, then go look up the FDA number to find out where the co-packer I'm like, that's an app right there. Like, why doesn't that app exist? And so like, I understand very underserved market. I don't know from a tech point of view if there's like returns in building for this market, but interesting space how people find creative solutions to different problems that they have, and really well-connected community in Austin though.
Very much so. I will tell you the other difference, the negative difference is that CPG people are way less sophisticated about business matters than tech people. Tech people have had blogs and books and everything else. Twitter, they know how to understand the language. They know what a Series B SaaS investment should look like.
Yeah.
It's a given. Nobody knows what a Series B CPG company investment should look like because there's so many different factors, from market to product to ingredient to logistics to everything. So CPG people need a lot more help, and that's why they brute force solutions. They don't think, oh, there should be an app for that. They think, oh, I've got to go to every single label and go backwards and figure this out from some government database, because they just don't think in terms of automation or anything 100%. Technology focused.
Yeah. No, I think it makes sense. I think it's also, if you think about the psyche and the background of a tech founder versus a CPG founder, they come from generically different backgrounds. So their problem-solving approaches are very different. But I think that's probably why their approach is very, hey, my goal is let me just get this product out. It's not let me get it out the most efficient way. Mm-hmm. It's my goal is to get my small batch made. That's all I care about.
That's right.
Let me get my small batch made and sold. Mm-hmm. Then I'll worry about my second batch. So I can see why people think about it that way.
Yeah, it's a very blue collar business.
Yeah. Switching gears a little bit to sort of approaching this space in Austin. One thing I wanted to get your take on, you're one of Austin's super connectors. What do you think is the importance of community for a founder or an entrepreneur or anyone in this space?
It's a loaded question because I'm very active in the community, but I understand why you asked it.
Yeah.
I think community is very critical, and it's critical for very specific reasons. It's not just because it's nice and not just because your mental health will increase because of the community you have. A community is what's going to help you hire the next person, find the next client, or do the next level of investment that you have to do to make your business work. But there's no way to understand that without having interconnection with the outside world. So a lot of founders do have the dream of sitting in their basement, and obviously in Austin's case, in their home office, building some app and just collecting money and never thinking about anything else. That's it. Like, that's the dream. That's not the way the world works.
100%.
And so people who have great products need to sell those products. And people who sell those products need to create companies around selling those products. And the only way you do that is for people like me who are on the non-engineering business side of things. So you don't get those people without a network. You don't get anything really without a network. You have to know people. You have to start somewhere. And usually that somewhere is a friend or some colleague that can connect you with the next person in line who can put you in touch with the next and the next and the next exponentially. That's what building a network is all about. But there's some very tangible benefits to having it. And I would say clients and hiring are the two biggest.
How has building community helped you? So CPG is one example of you building community. You started a meetup. Open Coffee is another one we haven't talked about yet. But why did you take this approach of community first? I don't know if it's an approach you took consciously or not, but...
It was very conscious. And it was conscious because it was my personality to do so. I've always been this kind of extrovert who likes to go to events and be a host and all that. The opposite, actually, is I started this because of my personality, not because it was an approach. And frankly, and I've said this many times, I make no secret about it, it's a very selfish thing for me. It's selfish because I like to throw a good party. I'm happy to host a good party. I'm happy to bring interesting people together and make connections. But it's actually very useful to me because I've built a reputation that I'm somebody to call when somebody has a weird or funky question. And those calls typically are accompanied by a coffee meeting or a lunch or something like that. And I would love to go to 10 coffee meetings a day. I'd love to go to 5 lunches a day. I would, but I just don't have the time. Nobody does. So what I've done is essentially made these meetups my office hours. So when somebody wants to pick my brain, it doesn't need a whole hour-long coffee and standing in line and parking and how are you and how's the family. Maybe it's 10 minutes in a quiet corner at one of these events, and I can knock out 8, 9, 10 meetings in a couple of hours, which to me is my way of doing things efficiently.
Yeah.
But that being said, the aspect of hosting these events, I feel it's an obligation. I feel like it's my duty. Like I have to do it because nobody else is going to do the way I will do it. And I want to be very inviting and welcoming and open to anybody that comes. And I want to make sure that their first taste of Austin or the industry is going to be a very good one. Because if they feel warm and embraced and comfortable, no matter what they're doing, they'll always remember that. And that typically comes back threefold. You know, you help somebody with no ulterior motive, and usually it comes back. That's just karma. And I believe in that. Not woo-woo, funky karma, but I think helping people typically helps yourself.
What's it? One piece of advice you have for younger, early stage, more startup founders with this aspect of community? Would you say build your own space for people to come? Would you say go find events that resonate with you? Or how should they use this to build, grow, whatever, like whatever they want to do with community?
In other words, how to find their tribe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I learned a long time ago. I actually learned it here at UT. You have to know the rules to learn how to break them. And so I do have a bit of an issue. Or I'll answer this two ways.
Yeah.
Number one, there's lots of events already established.
100%.
There's tons of stuff going on. It's not easy to find. There's no one single source of where all the meetups are, or who's
100%.
doing what. There should be. That's another app idea that I've had a couple of times. But there's no one place to go. So I would say before you dive in to start your own thing, at least test the waters. Just show up to a few others to make sure that they are or not your tribe. So go to things that are maybe a slightly out of your wheelhouse, but are adjacent. Like if you code in one language, maybe go to the meetup of the other language. But more importantly, just start figuring out, because the people that are at those meetups are typically at other meetups, and they could set you on the path of going to the right place based on what your needs are.
Yeah.
It will also help you hone your idea. Like, what is your tribe? You don't know yet until you start talking to all these different people. If you know exactly what you've done, you know exactly that you're an expert in a particular space and you're just moving here or moving somewhere from a place you already were and you want to start that, that's perfectly fine. I mean, I believe in that. There's a lot of diversity. There's a lot of things happening. So go right ahead. But, and I've seen this a lot with startups. Startups tend to forget that the world existed before they did. And they forget to Google their idea before they start it. And so one of the things that I do a lot is when somebody has a great idea, I kind of help them understand there's probably 10 other people with the same idea, and here's who it was. And not to deflate them, but to make sure they're swimming in the right lane.
100%.
And that just happened this week, actually. So it's on my mind.
It's funny you say that. A friend pinged me probably the last week of December. She's like, I have a great idea. I'm like, okay, can you help me build an app? I'm like, yeah. Okay, I want it out by March. I'm going to get 1,000 users by the summer, apply to YC, raise money by the end of the year, and quit my job next year. I'm like, okay, and you're going to do all of this while doing your 80-hour-a-week job and running your company? Like, yeah. I'm like, okay, great. And I'm like, it's just that the expectation that your idea is the best idea. I'm like, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying it's a good idea. Like, let's start on the path. But the expectation that it's all going to happen today, tomorrow, and it's going to work, and it's going to be great. And I'm like, that's where I feel like people sell the dream, the shiny object syndrome. And it's good to have. I'm not saying don't have it. I'm just saying be ready for, if there are hiccups, you got to go through the hiccups. Based on your experience, do you think there's anything missing in Austin right now from like a meetup community tribe aspect, or off the top of your head? I know
The number one thing that I've always said, and I mentioned earlier, is I think there needs to be a universal calendar.
Yeah, we've talked about this.
I've said this for years. Quite literally, I've been saying this for decades. It's not going to change. It's not going to get fixed. There's no technology solution that's going to wave a magic wand and fix this. This is a political problem, in that everybody who should be involved is self-selected. And that's the first part. Like, who's an entrepreneur startup organization, and what do you qualify, and and how big are you? So there's all kinds of like, who's on the in crowd, who's on the out crowd problem. Like, how big should the calendar be? But then once you're in it and you have your team, who updates it? Who gets to take things down? Who gets to decide what's appropriate, what's not appropriate? So these are problems that seem very foolish and very simple, but that's what's holding back a universal calendar app for tech events and startup events. I've tried to do it myself many times. I've fallen short too often to count. I've been involved with many, many groups. I'm involved with 3 right now here in Austin that are trying to build calendars. And I'd love to see it. I support them in any way I can, but it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
So that's number one. So just knowing what's going on, because Austin is a bit of an osmosis town. You kind of have to know what's going on and know what's going on. There's no single point of truth here in Austin.
100%.
There's no single blog that everybody goes to. There's no single Twitter feed that everybody reads. There's no Instagram follow that everybody has to read because that's where all the information is stored. We just don't have that. So we've got all these disparate threads. And within the tech community, we've got lots of different groups. We've got the crypto guys. We've got the AI guys. We've got the cybersecurity guys. We've got the e-commerce guys. We've got the dropship guys. We've got all these different guys and girls that are doing something similar, but different enough that they live in different worlds. There's a really big real estate tech community here. There's a legal tech community here. There's insurance tech, a big insurance meetup, insurance ATX. There's lots of things happening here, but they don't fit into place. And I know you're laughing. Nobody on the podcast can see that, but I'm the only person on earth that knows what all these things are. And it drives me crazy that more people just aren't following this stuff.
I go to a lot of events.
I go to a lot of them. Big fan. I appreciate it.
So my process is I have a VA, and over the last year of me going to events, I've figured out a process, a half-baked process where, okay, here's all the places events are listed. It's now probably a list of 20, 30 different sites, feeds, whatever. Mm-hmm. And this is not counting the ones where people will send me stuff on LinkedIn or like people post on LinkedIn.
These are your feeds, and then you've got the inbound private. Got it. Mm-hmm.
And so every week she goes through everything. She'll make an Excel sheet. And then I'll just go through, be like, hey, yes, no. And then she goes RSVPs and adds them to my calendar. And
That's brilliant.
And I have a process,
I love
right?
it. It's brilliant.
And everyone new I meet is like, hey, how do you find all these events? I'm like, there's a whole process. And so a lot of people have said, why don't you make a shared calendar? And so I'm like, I could do that. But then now, exactly like you said, there's the trade-off of, do I make a shared calendar for events I'm going to? Do I make one for all the events that are on my list? Or do I just share events that I'm going to? Because there's like a trade-off. And so
I have an opinion.
Yeah, I would love that.
Just knowing what I know about you, knowing what your goals are, and knowing that you have shown up to a lot of things and you have made friends, we have had lots of conversations. I think this would sincerely and genuinely help your personal brand if you published it.
Yeah.
But here's the twist. I'd publish the public calendar. Yeah. Great. I'd literally have a subscription to the ones you're actually going to.
Okay.
So same data set, but the condensed data set of the ones you've RSVP'd to, you basically sell that as a subscription. What's the private VIP events that I'm going to this week? Here you go. Here's the list. There's probably a lot of ways to do that because what you're doing is you're building in scarcity.
Yeah.
But you're also showing a higher level. The one thing I never do in my newsletter is start a VIP section.
Yeah.
And I probably, if I started it now, I'd lose 90%, maybe 99% of my audience because they're used to a free newsletter.
Yeah.
But if you start with a set charge and use that, maybe it's $10 a month, maybe it's $10 lifetime.
Yeah.
But it's just $10.
Yeah.
You get that. You get total access. It's going to put some money in your pocket. That's not why you do it.
Yeah.
You do it because they value it then.
Yeah, 100%.
They believe that they've owned it now and they value it. And the worst word in the entire startup lexicon is free.
Yeah.
There's nothing free.
100%.
Free doesn't exist.
100%.
And if it does, you're not going to value it. Because if you give it away for free, why should I pay for it?
100%.
Nobody washes a rental car. I keep saying this because it just doesn't, they don't care about it. It's not theirs.
Yes.
But I bet if you put that list together and you already have, I would happily give you some of my lists.
Yeah.
Because I have a bunch of those. I've got a couple of Excel sheets that are floating.
Yeah.
I think that's extra valuable to professionals, business professionals around town who might just be happy to say, hey, pay for it. But more importantly, and this is a little crazy, I wonder if you could be basically the ticket gateway for that.
Yeah.
What if you could sell the tickets? Since you have all these different things, or get an affiliate fee for anybody that does sell tickets.
Yeah.
So you can almost have like a little storefront.
Makes sense.
For every event that you get a kickback on.
Yeah. Because a lot of people are like, hey, how do you find all these events? How do you go to all these events? And I'm like, it's not rocket science. Like, it started with me just looking on Meetup.
Right.
Like, that's where it started.
Right.
And then over time, like, oh, Startup Grind does events. Oh, Antler does events. Mm-hmm. Oh, this organization does events. Oh, Austin Chamber of Commerce does events. Going to the events, you find out about events, and then you find out where they host events, and then you find out where they list events, because not everyone cross promotes.
Right.
And then I just keep adding a link every time. And then one of her weekly tasks, my VA's weekly task, is just making some weeks it's 5 events, some weeks it's 40 events. Right. It just depends on what's happening that week. But there's a whole process. And then I'm a part of a lot of Slack communities,
sure,
which is a whole different ballgame.
Right.
But that's also something. But
that's of intrinsic value.
Yeah, 100%.
Like what you've described and what you've put together, that has value to somebody like me.
Yeah.
I try to do that myself. I can't keep up with them all.
Yeah.
I try to. I'm at the point right now in my career where I'm not going to an event unless I'm invited by the host or it's my event, because I just don't have
100%.
So, but I really like that process, and that makes a lot of sense. A lot of people ask me, how do you know stuff? So I think you know this, but I put together a little 1-page guide. Yeah. Which is the Welcome to Austin.
And we'll link all that in the description.
So it's just a little 1-pager that says, here are the resources you need. That is a perfect resource. A friend of mine, well, actually 2 separate friends of mine has started something similar to this. Ollie did ATX.live, which was a web calendar of everything. And then Keith Casey had, at one point, I think he had something like 27 cities of every single scrape tech event he could find into one single Twitter feed. Okay. And it was brilliant because he figured out a way to charge for it and to insert ads in it. He's a great guy for you to talk to about this. Okay. But I think especially now, this is what we were touching on earlier. Yeah. The real issue is that post-COVID, nobody really knows where to go or what to do. Yeah. It's all, first of all, there are a lot of new faces, a lot of new people. Yeah. And there's very little word of mouth because of all the non-connectivity we have. So this would be a great resource for everybody. And the best part, and this certainly worked for me, you asked me earlier, has community helped me? Community gave me the job I have. It gave me the career I have. I mean, that's what it is. It's something I really hold very dear to my heart. But at the same time, I figured out a way to get paid for doing something I love. Yeah. So it's even better for me. Yeah. But it wouldn't have happened if I didn't start branding certain things with my name on it, and my newsletter and my events were that way for me. This could be that way for you. Yeah. And it makes sense. I'll definitely get that started this weekend. It's because when people started mentioning, I'm like, do I want to just do like a weekly newsletter? Does it make sense? But I'll put some thought behind that. But I'm actually on a few. There was one in about 10 years ago, Bernardo's list. That was parties in SF in New York. Yeah. There's 4 or 5 of the big ones. Like Andrew Young does New York. Yes. Andrew Young owns New York. That's his thing now, and he's got it. But why did he get it? Yeah. Because he just did it. And so I'm like, is that possible for Austin? Maybe. Yeah. It's actually, it's crazy it hasn't happened yet. Exactly. And that's why I'm like, why has it not? Is it no one's doing it? Is it not possible? Is there no appetite for it? Or I'm not sure, but. It's distribution. Yeah. It's how do people know about it? Yeah. It's really that simple. It's really, truly do it, make it good, make sure it's usable and configurable and all that. I mean, look, I put together a whole list of stuff for South by, and that takes me weeks. Yeah. But if you do this once a week and put it out as a newsletter, put it out as a Twitter feed, charge it upcharge for VIPs if you want or not, that's a real good way to get to know a lot of people, because then people start sending you ideas and start sending you the events. Yeah. For getting visibility. Right. Because they're going to, and maybe you charge for that. Yeah. Maybe not. Yeah. I'll think about that today and tomorrow. Yeah. And it's a great weekend project. Because it's easy to set up. Yeah. It's easy to set up. Coding. Yeah. This is design. 100%. And I don't know if your audience realizes this, because it just hit me. This is what a mentor session is. this is it.
Yeah.
This is the nuts and bolts of how this is a live mentor session for what I do, because I've never done this before. So I'm just trying to guide you to the right answers and what the possibilities are. But this was actually a very, very good example of that kind of thing, because this is what you do when you're a 100%. Mentor. You just kind of help figure out what the problems are so they can find the solutions.
Makes sense. I appreciate that. Something else I wanted to get your take on. We do these Saturday walks almost every week.
We'll tell them what they are. Theboardwalks.com.
Yeah.
And L. Beecher started it about a year and a half ago, and I love it.
Every Saturday, 8 a.m. if you're in Austin. I'll link everything in the description. You mentioned on one walk, you want your legacy to be being known as a super connector. Kind of paraphrasing that or going on that concept of legacy, what's your take on building a personal brand, a legacy, sort of a name, and how important is that for someone who's building a startup and entrepreneur? And is that something they should think about? Now, personal brand and legacy, I consider these sort of in the same realm of things, different times in someone's career. But how do you think about that? How much importance should someone starting out or in the middle of their journey or just in their journey think about this? And follow up to that, does online presence and building an online presence for your personal brand matter or not? Because you can have a good personal brand, it could be offline. Does an online brand matter? So it's like a multifaceted question.
I obviously am biased. I think a personal brand means something. I think it matters. I think that there's benefits to having one, especially if it's kept in the right place and it's considered a fair player in the market. I believe very strongly in a personal brand. I think that everybody should have one, but that's my entire personality. And that personal brand, my newsletter is what got me my job here in Austin for the first law firm that actually turned into my second job at a law firm here in Austin, started 4 months ago. But ultimately, I wouldn't have even known about those opportunities had I not had a personal brand. So I can tell you without a doubt, with 100% confidence, that a personal brand has launched me in a very different trajectory for my career in a very positive way.
Quick side note, define personal brand.
Personal brand is the promise that you and all your communications are making to an audience. It's actually who your audience is, because I think that defines you a lot. I think it's the voice that you're speaking in, like what's your tone, how do you treat that world, what's your worldview? And what you're ultimately trying to do is have people think of you in a certain way, good or bad. So that's a personal brand to me. And that whole thing starts with awareness.
Got it.
You can have as much swag as you want, much riz as you like, but if nobody knows about you, who cares? So it's also about, and not necessarily self-promoting, but being known. And my path, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong or good or bad, I just kind of felt the urge to be involved with civic organizations and stay on boards and, know the people who are also actively involved and becoming friends with them. And that begat other opportunities. So the personal brand started for me very early, but I thought it was the only thing I had to offer. So I had to hone that particular skill.
Makes sense. And did you start online? Did you start offline? Are you a mix of both? Where did you put emphasis on? And
it's a great question. So I started offline because I'm basically pre-internet. Well, internet started in 95. I started in 99. So let's say we were 4 years into the internet. Yeah. It wasn't what you thought it was. I mean, it was the Wild West. It was a fun, interesting, great time. It drew a lot from like the libertarian ideals of the BBSs and the gaming community. Like it was just a fun time to be a nerd.
Yeah.
And I certainly was. And I felt, the only way for me to network was to go out and meet people and shake hands and, rub shoulders. And that's what we did. I did that in Houston in the business community for many, many years. When the internet really came into its own with actual social networks and LinkedIn, I was actually one of the original beta users of LinkedIn.
Nice.
Not original, but like early batch. So I've been on LinkedIn longer than most people. And I liked it. I liked knowing what other people were up to. I'm nosy that way.
Nice.
So being connected was a very natural thing. I remember very distinctly being on Friendster and trying to reload it every 5 minutes to see who else was on there. And then years later, I actually met the guy who started Friendster, green room at South by Southwest. And I remember him distinctly being the most unfriendly guy I ever met, even though he started Friendster.
I'm just making a note to Google what Friendster is.
I think it kills me. Friendster is the precursor to MySpace, which is the precursor to...
I know MySpace.
Facebook. It was the original social network.
Got it.
It was like the proto-man social network.
Got it.
That's how old I am. The fact is that I started offline, but quickly went online with my LinkedIn presence. And one of the things I did was become friends with people in other cities and other spheres of influence, and stayed friends with them. And to that's actually helped me quite a bit. So I like being the person that has a guy somewhere. I got a guy in New York, or I got a guy in Atlanta, or I got a guy somewhere. Yeah. I do have those people, and I keep those relationships up quite a bit.
Nice. So for someone starting out, your recommendation is to spend at least some time building a brand online?
And absolutely. Like, I don't care what anybody says. I don't care where we are. But right now, today, when we're doing this podcast, in the early part of 2024, if you don't have an up-to-date LinkedIn, then you're not a person to me. You're not real. And I actually gave the exact same comment to my high school kids, because it's time. They need it. 100%. They're starting to look at colleges and starting to look at jobs. And, you know, even if it's old school and silly and it seems very archaic and stiff, LinkedIn is still the only way I know that you're a quote unquote a real person. 100%.
Yeah.
You can have as many other social networks you want. You can do TikTok, you can do Instagram. I don't care. But you have to have a LinkedIn to be in business.
100%.
From there, and this is something that's my secret. You asked about how to build your online presence. This is something that I learned, and now I'm sort of stuck with it. But the best way to actually build an online presence is not to write content. It's to comment on others' content. It's to like, comment, discuss. If you could become part of the conversation, sometimes your comments are more important than the original posts. And so that's my thing. I'm on LinkedIn all the time. I'm liking people. I'm making comments. It matters because, number one, the way I do it is I do it to show my support for them.
100%.
I do it to say, I believe in this endorsement. I do it for reach. I have a very large network, which I'm very proud of, but I like to use that network to pluck other people out of obscurity and really share things that nobody else would see.
100%.
I might have 30,000 connections. They have 30. You know, I'm going to be able to help them a lot more just by showing that up. So I like to do that.
100%. No, I agree. Over the past year, 2 years, I have this thesis that distribution and personal brand is going to be very important in the coming years, whether it's for your business, yourself, your personality. If you can own some sort of distribution, even if that's like 10 people, that's a lot more valuable than owning nothing. Because if those 10 people are willing to tell you, hey, this idea is great, or this idea sucks, or they're willing to sign up to a beta of whatever product you build, that feedback is so crucial that you can either decide, hey, this idea sucks, I'm going to kill it, or hey, there is something here, let me put more money and time behind it. And just that concept of distribution, I hate putting myself out there. Like, it was very daunting to start this podcast. But the idea of distribution, and even if you're able to help even one person, I don't think I've done it all. I don't have enough experience, but even if one person is able to listen to this podcast and be like, you know, I think I can avoid that one mistake, like you said, the pitfalls, I think it'll be worth the endeavor of, you know, doing this podcast. But
totally agree.
No, 100% agree that building some sort of distribution, whether it's writing, video, text, LinkedIn, whatever, you should own an audience, whatever the audience is.
I don't know if you were in the conversation we talked about at one of the walks a few weeks ago, where somebody said that your audience is your only IP. The only intellectual property you really truly own is the audience of people that listen to you. And that's the only thing that's portable. So I found that quote to be very interesting, and I believe it, but I strongly believe that building an audience, building an army is the only thing that these influencers do, these content creators do, but they do it for a purpose. They do it to build themselves up for the benefit of their products, whatever they're selling. But if you do it yourself, you're building a tribe. You're building your own audience. 100%. You're basically telling the world your vision, and you're trying to get other people to believe in you. But what they do believe, and they're true believers, they'll tell their friends and their friends and their friends. And that's how you build a movement.
100%.
So yeah, I agree that personal brand is really critical.
You mentioned there's 130 VCs in Austin.
Approximately.
Having been in this space, working with the space pretty closely, wanted to get your take on how should founders approach reaching out to VCs? How should founders approach getting connected to VCs, getting feedback from VCs? Because on one side, you get the whole, hey, here's a list of VCs, sign up, get a list, 1,000 VCs, cold email, cold deck. And I personally think that's the worst way, right?
That's a great way to get on the no-fly list.
Exactly.
It's terrible. Fine, but it happens. There'll always be a place for that. And the worst part, so getting that is the equivalent of being a Nigerian prince.
Yeah.
There's no difference. There's no daylight between those two things. So do you want to be looked at that way or not? So I would think very carefully about somebody using one of those lists or using one of those services, because the chance of them working is a lot less than the higher chance of the VCs thinking you're a clown for using them. That's a simple fact.
Yeah.
So I'd be careful of those. All right. We have to take just a little bit step back.
Yeah.
We talk about VCs like they're these vaunted gods.
Yeah.
They're not.
Yeah.
I promise you. I know a lot of them. I talk to them all day, every day. I had coffee with one on Friday. I talked to one yesterday. They're all friends of mine, and I consider them friends. But you got to remember, venture capitalists are salespeople, and they're selling money. That's it. If you figured out that they're not these vaunted genius of business, they're good and smart people, no doubt. And they're really intelligent when it comes to how to build a brand and how to build a company and how to sell it. But they're no smarter than anybody else. They are in a position where they have this sense of power, because they do. But VCs only invest 2% of startups every year. There's just a very, very, very tiny fraction of people that take VC money and that actually work out. So I'm not really focused on those folks. I know them all. I deal with them all. But you asked how to approach them. If you decide that you're venture fundable and you're scalable, you meet all the criteria, how do you go about meeting VCs? Well, the number one very best way to meet a VC that's going to be effective is to get one of the founders in their portfolio to make the introduction. A warm intro from an existing or currently exited founder or recently exited founder is the best way to get an introduction, period, the end. So that's the first, second, and third way to do it. The fourth and fifth way is to get a trusted partner. In my case, I'm a trusted advisor in that I work for a law firm, which gives me some credence to be able to make an introduction. Yeah. And that includes, by the way, accelerators or any kind of venture studio type situations. The third way is directly emailing them as a cold email. Normally, I say cold emails never, ever, ever work, but that's actually not true. They do work. So if you write a brief, direct, and very specific email to the right person at a firm, there is a chance you'll get a call back. But founders should be talking to founders, and founders should be talking to VCs.
Makes sense.
That's the way I look at it.
Yeah.
And I'm a very distant, like late runner in that race.
Yeah. And the reason I ask is there's a lot of founders who get stuck in this cycle of, I got to raise to move ahead. And you know Salim from the Walk Anti-VC.
I'm looking forward to this event tomorrow.
Yeah. He was the last guest on the episode. And
good company.
He talks about there's this whole vicious cycle of got to raise, you got to get money. And I feel like, again, there's this notion in the startup ecosystem that if you don't raise, you're not going to be successful, or your company's not going to work. And it could be lack of information. It could be lack of knowledge. It could be you're just unaware, because that's what people push. That's the answer. Hey, you got to raise to be successful. I'm like,
why do you think people are fleeing to Austin? Because it's that mentality that drives people crazy in San Francisco, that hyper growth at all costs, that $1 billion or bust mentality. That's just not the way we are here, which is why you have to have VC to get those kinds of exits. Yeah. We all know that. I'm not arguing that in any way. Yes, if you want a $1 billion exit in a year and a half, 2 years, you need a bunch of VC money to burn to get to that rocket ship going. Fine. But once again, because Austin is not that ambitious or we don't care for the same goal,
100%.
then we're not racing to raise a bunch of money. Plus, the local VCs or the VCs that invest locally typically have a West Coast look, but an East Coast mentality.
Yeah.
They look like West Coast investors, growth at all costs, but their East Coast mentality says financials matter and product fit matters and, cost ratios matter and, profit matters. So we actually have the best of both worlds here in a lot of ways. But both of those extremes are tempered by the fact that we are in some ways a little bit conservative because we don't have the same kind of capital that the guys on either coast have. That being said, a good solid A round here is a $5 to $8 million round.
Yeah.
That's a seed round in San Francisco.
Yeah.
That's nothing.
Yeah.
That's couch cushion money.
Yeah.
But we can make a $5, $6, $8 million A round work to a $20, $30 million B and a $100 to $200 million exit without too much trouble.
100%.
Now, that same business, that same idea in San Francisco, that instead of raising 5 to 8, they raised 15 to 30 on a Series A. You can't get those kinds of venture exits now because there's nobody buying. IPO market is basically in the toilet.
Yeah.
And the acquirers, the major companies that acquire, are laying off people left and right. They're not buying companies. So that being said, we are once again in a macro down portion of the market. It's not going to change substantially until the election this year. And so I still think it's a bit of a nuclear winter for raising money, although I am seeing people start opening doors for VC money a little bit.
Yeah. Sweet. Some questions I like to ask my guests at the end. One is, for founders listening, what are 3 resources you recommend that founders should listen to? And this could be books, podcasts, resources, whatever.
Easy. So 3 things that you should be listening to. And these are some really basic and easy answers. Make sure you listen to My First Million podcast. It's fantastic. I love it. I love those guys. They have the right mindset for growing this and building businesses.
Yeah.
So take a listen to them. You have to listen to the All In podcast. You might not agree with any of them. You might think they're a bunch of blowhards. You might think they're just billionaire playboys that don't know what they're talking about, but they are well thought of and well-respected people who have opinions that matter. I listen to dozens of podcasts, tons of them.
3 resources could be anything, books, blogs, whatever.
The obvious book, and it feels so silly to say it, is Venture Deals.
Yeah.
Brad Feld's Venture Deals. I mean, I have 2 copies of it.
Yeah.
And you read it.
Very dense book.
Yeah, it's dense. It takes a long time to get through it. But if you're in a spot, if you're in a pickle, and they touch on one of those matters, that matters. I just saw this online this morning, and this might matter. Naval Ravikant's writings have all been condensed into a single book.
Okay.
That was just put on Hacker News this morning. It's a tab open on my browser.
Okay, nice.
But I would read a lot of his stuff. I've been reading his blog since he started it. And he was actually kind enough to be on a panel of mine at South by Southwest back in 2009. But I would definitely read his writings.
Nice. What is your startup stack? So I ask every person who comes on, what's their stack? So like Slack, GitHub, Notes, Notion, whatever. Google, what's your stack? It could be your notebook and pen, but
so that's a great question. I'm real basic. And when I say that, I am a plain vanilla Google user. I have 2 Google accounts, my Gmail, regular, like personal Gmail account, and my professional business account, T-Squared Agency. So I'm in Google on both of those accounts all day, every day. A lot of people are going to laugh, but I'm actually a Microsoft guy.
Okay.
I'm in Outlook for my regular job, but my number one thing I'm in all day, every day is PowerPoint.
Okay.
I love PowerPoint. I'm a PowerPoint nerd. I love it. I do all of my presentations, obviously in PowerPoint, but I do a lot of my brainstorming in PowerPoint. Like
nice.
You're talking about earlier, your friend is doing a mood board, do it in PowerPoint.
Nice.
PowerPoint's actually a very powerful program if you know how to use it.
It is.
Like everything. But let me put it this way. Lawyers have Word open up all day long. Accountants have Excel open all day long. But guys like me have PowerPoint open all day long.
Nice.
And so I've really found a lot of really interesting uses for it. I do all of my single page setups and all that. Like
have you tried
a flyer.
Have you tried Miro?
Yeah, I've tried them all.
Yeah.
But they're not PowerPoint.
Okay.
Yeah, it's great. I use Canva. I use all those things. But I'm just telling you,
PowerPoint's
don't sleep on PowerPoint. That's all. And just a funny, like weird, like very basic thing.
All Microsoft tools are very powerful if you go to that level of usability.
I write macros in Word so that I can do my newsletter. I couldn't do my newsletter without it until I find somebody that can actually code something up for me.
Yeah.
But it's, I've had to become a power user, even though I don't want to be. I don't want to know anything about Visual Basic or anything like that, but I do now.
Yeah. Makes sense. Cool. I ask every guest to give me a question for whoever's on next. So your question from the last guest is, you
told me who it was, so now I'm going to get him.
What's your mission, and when did you realize that this is your mission?
I described my mission earlier. My mission is to connect people. That's what I do well. I'm good at it. I enjoy doing it. I can get paid to do it. I think it benefits everybody. I think everybody wins. I don't think I'm taking anything away from anybody if I do it.
Yeah.
And so my mission is to do that very, very well for as long as I can in a meaningful way, and hopefully instill that kind of mentality in other people so they can do it in the future. So that's my mission.
When did you realize that this was your mission?
Early on. I think I was probably in college. I think it was, I just knew that I was good at it and I enjoyed it. And it was something that it really worked out for me. And that's why I was able to start my business while I was still a senior. And it just sort of clicked. I'm a people person. I know it sounds silly. It's trite. It's almost dumb, but the world still needs them. And I'm pretty good at it. So I want to keep doing it. I'm not going to get by on my good looks for long. So
Makes sense.
I got to do this.
What's your question for whoever my next guest is?
What makes them truly happy? What puts them in a state of just pure happiness? I'm always curious about that.
I like that.
It could be anything.
I like that.
It could be having a cup of tea. I don't know. But I've been thinking about that a lot.
Yeah. Well, do you have an answer to that?
Bluebell ice cream late at night. That's my jam.
Do you have a flavor?
Yeah, cookie two-step, of course. What are you talking about? Everybody has a flavor.
I've never had. I'm a dark chocolate person nowadays.
Smart, man. No, it's that's my crippling addiction to ice cream.
Yeah,
but I'm working on it. Trying to hold back.
I live in the Domain across from Jenny's, so every night it's like it closes at 11, so you have up until 11 p.m. every day to decide whether we can go get ice cream or not.
Super big old window.
And exactly. And I think that's 11:30 on Fridays and Saturdays. It's like, that's a long time to stave off ice cream.
But the fact that you've committed that to memory tells me that that's a serious issue.
Yeah.
I hear you.
But yeah, that's all I had for you in terms of walking through that. Is there anything you want people listening to know? I know you have a lot of South by events coming up.
Sure.
Probably try to get this episode out. We will get it out before South by. So where do you want people to follow you? What should they know about you? And what events are you doing?
Easiest way to follow me is Linktree/Marc1919. That's MARC1919. That gets you all the links and all the guides and all the newsletters and all the South by Southwest stuff. And connect with me on LinkedIn. That's where I usually live, as I mentioned. And I'm really doing something big for South by this year. I'm doing a series of events and programs and panels and some happy hours and a few other things that I'm really excited about. So that's going to be a big one for us this year.
Sweet. But thank you for coming on, Marc. Thanks for tuning into Funds and Founders. If you're a local Austin founder, a venture capitalist, or just someone who's building and in the middle of their journey and would like to be featured on an upcoming episode, submit your guest pitch to abhinavsinha.podcast@gmail.com. If you have a founder-specific event you'd like to promote on the podcast, you can also reach out to me. If you want to continue to get support through your founder journey, hit the follow button and I'll see you in the next episode.